Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our latest virtual event, Should I Do the LPC or SQE, with BPP University Law School, Kennedy's, Shakespeare Martineau, and TLT. My name is Sophie Antian, I'm Events Coordinator here at Legal Cheek, and I'll be handing over to the panel very shortly to get started. But firstly, like I said, a very warm welcome to everybody. We've had over 550 registrations for this event, so it's great to see so many of you here. And just before we get started, I just want to run over a few things about the event today and tell you a little bit more about the event. So this is the first in a series of 8 SQE themed virtual events in partnership with BPP to help students understand what the SQE, the biggest change in legal education in a generation, means for students and for all of you in the audience. The events will feature a number of BPP's partner law firms and a variety of other firms. The events will cover everything from qualifying work experience to funding, advice for non-law students, firms' approaches to newly qualified lawyers training under different regimes, and many more themes. Now, in advance of each event, we'll publish an associated piece of editorial. The piece that ran for today's event is entitled Should I Do the SQE or LPC, which is an interview with BPP's Johnny Hurst, who I'll be handing over to very shortly to hear more from. And one of the team from Legal Cheek is popping that link to the editorial in the chat in the sidebar. So if you haven't read that piece yet, do have a read after today's event. Now, after each event, a recording of the session will be made available, going live on Legal Cheek 1 month after each event has taken place. And this content can be found on Legal Cheek's new dedicated SQE hub. And again, someone from the Legal Cheek team is popping that link in the sidebar chat. So everyone keep that link handy, as like I said, that's where you'll be able to find all of the video recordings and editorial related to these events. But for now, I'd like to invite the speakers to join me up on stage and welcome them to today's event. So speakers, if you'd like to join me up on stage. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Sophie.
Great, fantastic. We've got everyone. So welcome, speakers. Thank you for joining us for today's event. And Johnny, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and I'd just like to warmly welcome everybody as well. We're delighted at BPP to be partnering with Legal Cheek for this series of SQE-themed events, because we have found that there is a lot of misunderstanding amongst students and sometimes amongst those who teach you at your undergraduate universities as to what the SQE entails in terms of the process, the choices that you have. And we do hope that this series of events really does try and unblock some of those areas that are troublesome from your point of view. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is, before I introduce our excellent panel for the evening, I'm going to just first of all just put into context why it's so important that we're holding this event. And this is basically on the back of the fact that the SRA, the regulator, has now changed the position that you can actually qualify via one of 2 pathways, or possibly one of 2 pathways. The old pathway, the LPC, is the traditional pathway that's still available for many students to qualify through to be a solicitor. And that's to, after you've got your law degree and your relevant conversion course, like the GDL or PGDL or Law Foundations course, once you've got that, you then do your LPC and then a 2-year training contract. Now, that's available for anybody who started their law journey prior to the end of this calendar year, and they have to have accepted their offer at or started the course at least by the 1st of September of this year. So that's the vast majority of people in this room can go down the LPC route, but they can also go down the new route, which is the SQE pathway, and what that involves is you having to do the SQE, the Solicitor's Qualifying Examination, which is in 2 parts, and also to do qualifying work experience. It's a bit more flexible as to when you do qualifying work experience, which is 2 years at a number of law firms, or possibly 1 law firm, up to 4 law firms, in fact. So there's much more flexibility as to how you acquire that. But there are lots of questions about qualifying work experience that students have, which we will cover during the course of this session, not least because the firms that we have on our panel this evening are going to be moving their cohorts from the LPC to the SQE in the near future. So without further ado, let us introduce our panel. We have three law firms represented, and my colleague Liz Ritter, who has regular contact with the many law firms that send their students to BPP, and therefore has a really good window on what the views are of the rest of the profession. So let's start first of all with Sam Bracey from TLT. Tell us a little bit about your role and your firm, just to give us an idea of where you're coming from.
Hi everyone. So I'm Sam. I'm from TLT. I'm the future talent advisor at the firm. So I deal with all the recruitment and assessment processes. You might have heard that we won Law Firm of the Year last night. So that's where we are in terms of firm. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about SQE or LPC.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on Law Firm of the Year at TLT. That's
Thank
great to
you.
hear. Hannah, a writer of Shakespeare Martineau, tell us a little bit about your firm and where you're based.
Hello, I'm based in Birmingham. I work for Shakespeare Martineau. I look after early ambitions. I also side hustle as a Madonna impersonator with my fancy headset. Not really, but I wish I was. So I look after early ambitions. So everything from how we attract, how we recruit, and how we develop talent into our business, from trainee solicitors to apprentices to people who are going down a completely different pathway, not even legal. So we look at all things in the area of work that we do. So we are regional firm, Shakespeare Martineau. If you haven't heard of us, we are doing things a little bit differently. One of our a big thing that kind of explains a bit about who we are is our drive to be a B Corp organisation. So if you haven't heard of B Corp, we are well on our way to becoming B Corp, and essentially a B Corp organisation is one that balances profits with being a business for good. So having a really positive impact on the environment, which is very topical at the moment with COP, and our people, and on the communities that we work in, and generally in the world in general. So it's a really exciting time here at Shakespeare Martineau. So that's a little bit of an introduction to me.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And finally, Luke, tell us about yourself, Kennedy's, and where you're based and where the firm works from.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Johnny, and thanks for inviting me along to attend today to join Legal Cheek. I hope everyone attending finds it useful. So my name is Luke Evans. I am the HR advisor in the early careers team for Kennedy's. So my role essentially is to recruit our trainees and apprentices, and then oversee the trainee opportunity programs and apprenticeships until our junior lawyers qualify. Kennedy's is a global law firm. We specialise in insurance, particularly in dispute resolution and litigation, but we also have a number of teams in other areas such as healthcare, liability, and the commercial division. So we have offices all around the UK, but also around the globe as well. Yeah, really looking forward to the event today.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And finally, and certainly not least, Liz, my colleague Liz Ritter from BPP, I'll let you describe what your role is at BPP to the audience. So to explain why you've got this window in terms of the rest of the profession.
Thanks, Johnny, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. My name's Liz Ritter. I'm head of business development at BPP. My pretty much sole focus at the moment in my role is really thinking about SQE and pathways to qualification. So pretty much every conversation I have during my working week is really all about SQE. So discussing SQE with many firms, with regulators, with students as well. Really thinking about when and how to transition to SQE. So that's my insights. I hope to share some insights with you as well as our panelists today of the market more generally as well. So thank you, Johnny.
Fantastic. So we've got representation effectively from regional firms, from London firms, national firms, and of course Liz has got this window on a lot of the profession as well. I and Liz used to be solicitors in practice as well, so we've got our own experience to draw upon as well. So the way this is going to run is we're going to run the panel session in 3 sections. The first section will be looking at the timing of the switch to the SQE from the LPC regime that each of the 3 firms represented on the panel are looking to work towards. And Liz will give us a little bit of a window on how the profession is at large, and have people moved over to the new regime yet? Are they moving over? Have they not made their mind up? And we'll get a bit of a window on where the profession is there. The second part of the session will be looking at the difference between qualifying work experience and training contracts, and looking at the different approaches that the firms on the panel are making. And finally, we'll look at how you as individual students will end up going about choosing your SQE training course if that's what you decide you want to do. What's important to you, what's important to the law firms on the panel that are represented, what's important to the rest of the profession when taking on future trainees and future newly qualified lawyers as well, because that you have to think longer term as well as just getting to your training contract or qualifying work experience. So lots to cover, and I'm pleased to say we will be delighted to take your questions as we are running through any section. We can't promise to answer all those questions, but we will answer as many of them as we can. So first question, panel, and thank you so much again for being with us today. One of the key areas or key issues that law firms have had to grapple with over the course of the last few years is switching their cohorts from LPC cohorts to SQE cohorts. So the question is, has your firm decided when to switch to the SQE regime for training? And if so, when are you switching? What are the reasons behind that decision? Perhaps we could start this time with Hannah. Hannah, tell us what are Shakespeare Martineau's, what's their strategy or what's their decision in terms of moving over?
Yeah, so we've gone through a big process to make this decision, actually. And as I'm sure Luke and Samantha have been in the exact same position with their firms, it's been quite a lot of conversations, a lot of focus groups throughout our business, speaking to people who will be going down the qualification route, also speaking to people who are currently on the qualification route, speaking to partners, supervisors around what works best. Our position is actually, as a business, we want to create choice for anyone who's looking to qualify. And the SQE is a great opportunity to build that choice. So we are, in theory, moving to the SQE now. So in theory, we are starting to embrace it now. You can, in theory, qualify through the SQE route at Shakespeare Martineau off your own steam, as that's kind of one of the benefits of the SQE. You don't necessarily need a training contract. However, we are in that creation of choice. We are offering two other routes to qualification through the SQE. So the first route is we are going to be embracing the SQE graduate apprenticeship, and that's going to be an option for people who are already in our business, who are in an area where they know they want to qualify, they're loving the work that they're doing, and we want to put them through the SQE graduate apprenticeship because we want to make sure that training that they're getting in the SQE is really high quality training, and that we're able to put them through a really well structured program to mean that when they're qualified, they're a great newly qualified solicitor. And as well as that, we are still offering the training contract. So our graduate apprenticeships, those start kicking off in around March time for internal people, and our SQE training contract, that will be available from 2024. I'm sure that TLT and Kennedy's, I don't know, I'll push this to you, I'm not sure if you do, I'm assuming you recruit 2 years in advance for your trainees also. So our 2022 recruitment campaign will be for 2024 trainees, and we expect that most of them will go through the SQE route for that program. However, coming back to that point of choice, we're not completely leaving the LPC behind. We are still offering that as a route. So if you are already going down the LPC route or have a real passion to go down that route, we're not going to say, well, no, you can't qualify with us. It's about giving that choice while we've got that choice. But 2024 will be when the SQE training contracts launch. I think that answers your question. I hope it does.
Thank you, Hannah. I think just to be clear for everybody, when we're talking about years, there's the years when you start your training contract as a SQE trainee, so to speak, but there's also the year you actually study for your SQE, which will be the previous year. So if you're talking about the 2024 intake, you're talking about students who will study for the SQE in 2023. And so it's just really important that we make sure we understand when we're referring to years. I'm doing this for the students' benefit. You explained it very clearly, but it's easy to misunderstand which year you're referring to. So just to summarize then, we've got one firm, Shakespeare Martineau, who are very open towards receiving LPC applications or applications from LPC graduates, but have made a commitment to for their 2022 recruitment for students to do the SQE in 23 and start their training contracts in 24, if I understand it rightly. So let's move on to Luke, if we can do. Let's hear where Kennedy's are.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're also aware of when we're starting our SQE intake. So as Hannah said, we did have it was a big process at Kennedy's. We did have a lot of conversations, and we started making preparations for our SQE program a number of years ago. A lot of the conversations we had with BPP, who we're working in partnership with to deliver our SQE program. So we actually opened our applications for our new SQE training program in May last year, and we've taken on our very first cohort of SQE trainees in September just gone. So we have a number of SQE trainees now working in the UK across our different offices. But rather than switching from the LPC route to the SQE route, we are continuing to offer our traditional training contract route for those going down the LPC route, but have also introduced the SQE training program for those who are looking to qualify down the new route. So the main difference between the two programs which we are offering, and both are open at the moment for external candidates, is that with the new SQE training program which we've put in place, rather than moving around teams as with seat rotations as you would do on a traditional training contract, those on our SQE training program would be recruited into one of our specific teams, and would remain in that team for the duration of the program, which is 30 months in length. So the reason why we decided to put that program in place, I mean, Kennedy's has always been a firm that's at the forefront of innovation and very open to new ideas, particularly new routes to qualification. And in 2012, we were one of the very first law firms who opened applications for our apprenticeships and took on legal apprentices who are actually sitting the SQE in September this year. So with the success of that program, with us having around sort of 50 apprentices in our UK offices now, we decided to build on that success and continue to widen access into the legal profession by offering both an LPC option and an SQE option for graduates.
Just to clarify, Luke, in terms of the years that you're talking about, are you committing to the SQE specifically only in a particular year, or are you now are you taking on SQE applicants now, or are you putting it off for 12 months or so? Can you just clarify when the first SQE cohort would be for external candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first we opened applications last May for our first intake of SQE trainees, and they joined us this September. The applications which are now open on our website would be for trainees to join us next September 2022. With our traditional training contracts, we do recruit 2 years in advance, but for the SQE training program, without that need to go away and do the LPC, we're recruiting 1 year in advance for that program.
Interesting. We've had a question, quite a few questions that come up off the back of both what you and Hannah have said. And don't worry, folks, we will try and answer as many of those as we can. But before we just move on to those, let's just hear from Sam, if we could do, as to where TLT are in terms of choosing when to switch to the SQE.
Yeah, of course. So we recruit 2 years in advance. So the current milk round and attraction that we're going through now is for our September 2024 cohort, and that will be an SQE cohort. But like Hannah, it's very much a choice. As in, if you already have an LPC, then you can definitely still apply. We will probably just exempt you from the SQE1 exam and then slot you in with the rest of our SQE cohort for SQE2 and the QWE, because we just really want to give people that choice, and we don't want to exclude those that have already done the LPC, haven't yet got a training contract, and then that would be like a closed door for them. So that's still an option for them as well.
Yeah, and I think not a lot of people know that. Thanks for raising that, Sam, that students who are LPC graduates who either don't get a training contract or wish to qualify with a firm that now has qualifying work experience can still effectively, you're still qualifying under the old LPC regime, but you can effectively qualify under the old LPC regime by doing SQE2 plus qualifying work experience to complete all the necessary stages to qualification. Okay, so Liz, you've got a window on the whole of the profession, not the whole of the profession, every single firm, but certainly a large number of firms, particularly a number of leading firms. What is the position? Of course, we've got the consortium of firms that BPP have had already signed up to the SQE programs already, but there's a number of other firms that we deal with, many more, that have got different positions. So could you just summarise, give us the feel of where the profession is at the moment in deciding to switch?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. No surprises probably for you to hear following our panelists that there's a great deal of choice out there, and also variety as well in terms of different firms. But I think this idea of offering choice and not closing down any avenues, I think, is really important as well. If you have a look at some firms are already accepting people and embracing SQE, going down that pathway, whether it's within an apprenticeship or otherwise. Other firms, to the extent that they are sort of saying this is what we're going to do, are choosing for their intakes joining them in 2023 that they will primarily be going down the SQE pathway, and that includes the City Consortium that you referred to before, Johnny. Many other firms are sort of, as a whole, I would say, deferring it to the following years. So it will be their intake joining them in 2024, like the panelists have been saying. But that's not to say that that's the only pathway. So other pathways will be fine as well. But if you take the sort of the primary pathway being SQE, that's probably going to be for the people joining those firms in 2024. So hopefully that's a little quick insight into the market more generally.
And just as a follow-up question, Liz, in terms of when do you think we'll be in a situation when there are more people going down the SQE route than the LPC route? Because certainly we know for recruitment at BPP this year and across providers, there have been many more LPC students, whereas they could have done the SQE this November. When do we think that it'll switch to 24, 25, somewhere around then?
That's a really good question, Johnny. And I have to say it's a really hard question to answer, because I think not everybody has made those decisions. Not entirely clear. I would say this switch will probably happen come the cohorts joining programs in 2023. I think that's where it will tip over to more people, many more people doing SQE than LPC. But I'm also envisaging that there'll be a shift over for next year as well. So a shift over next year. We're not seeing it quite yet. A shift over next year, and a bigger shift the following year.
And I think we've already answered one of the other questions in this series. Will you have mixed LPC and SQE cohorts? And it was interesting that Sam raised this possibility that if you an LPC graduate, we'll still embrace you within our cohort, and we will require you to qualify with SQE2 and qualifying work experience. Is that a similar position that Kennedy's and Shakespeare Martineau are taking, or have you got a different approach to LPC students?
We're absolutely the same. So we're running the exact same time. It's about that creation of choice for us. So if you have your LPC, we don't want you to be panicking, thinking I can't qualify, because we will just slot you into our training contract program, whether it's LPC or SQE.
And there is a follow-up question from Paolo, who said, Will the LPC and SQE be weighted in equal merit in the application process? I get the feeling that the answer is yes to that from everybody, but just can you confirm that?
Yeah, I think I responded to that in the chat actually. From our perspective, yeah, they will be. The only thing from my perspective is thinking around QWE. So if you are doing your own SQE and qualifying yourself through the SQE, then think around that qualifying work experience and how you make sure that you are getting the right sort of work experience to stand out at NQ level.
And we'll cover that in the third section of this session. That's great. There's a question here for you, Luke, from Kenneth, who doesn't have A levels but got an LLB in the UK. He's a foreign qualified lawyer and interested in Kennedy's SQE training program. Would it be an issue to come from that sort of background?
No, absolutely not. We welcome applications from all applicants, and in regards to sort of A levels, we don't just look at A levels and discard applications. We look at our applications as a whole, including things like work experience and the answers to the questions on our application form. So we'd certainly encourage him to apply for our roles.
And there was one other question for you, Luke, as well. Don't worry, panel, I will equalise the question, but it was actually quite a relevant question. It was interesting that your new look training contract for qualifying work experience wouldn't be based on a seat rotation system. You mentioned that you would qualify in the area that you were recruited within. So that means if you is there any possibility for movement between departments, or is that really a commitment you need to make from day one? And how do you make sure that that people are going into the right areas that they've got very little experience of?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it would be. With the SQE training program, it would be recruited into one sort of specific team. And I suppose the reason we're quite confident with that model is that's how we our legal apprenticeship and solicitor apprenticeship programs work, which we've been running for a number of years now. For those who would like to have that experience of rotating around different teams throughout their training and experience, we sort of recommend going for the training contract route, which, as I said, we're continuing to offer. But between that, while our applications are open, so between now and the end of the year, for example, we do run a number of insight events, and those are particularly aimed at giving some really in-depth information about the specific teams, particularly those that are looking to recruit a training on the SQE program, so that those interested in applying for our roles can come along and hear from the fee earners and the trainees within teams, and really find out exactly what it is that those teams do and whether they'd be interested in pursuing a career in that area of work.
Fabulous. And panel, the last question in this section was, well, what is your advice then to students who are contemplating starting the LPC or the SQE in September 22? And this might be something that you find difficult to answer. So I suspect I'll probably start off with Liz on this one. If you don't have a training contract, should you go for the LPC or the SQE if you don't have a training contract yet? If you aspire to being in a firm that maybe has embraced the SQE in the way that the panel has done so far, is there a reason not to do the SQE? It's quite an in-depth, complicated decision really on this. There isn't really a yes or no answer, I don't believe, Liz. What would you advise that self-funding student who aspires to working in firms that maybe are shifting over to the SQE?
So I think the first point is do your research and come along to events like this and hear from employers. Think about the types of firms that you have an interest in and are thinking about applying to, and really see if they're expressing a preference. So that's, I guess, a first point. I think the advantage of SQE for a self-funding student, or for a student, particularly maybe somebody who's already got some qualifying work experience already behind them. So if you've got a law degree, perhaps you've been paralegaling or working in a legal environment, and that would count towards your qualifying work experience, then certainly SQE gives you more flexibility in terms of that pathway to qualification. So there are definite advantages there in terms of SQE and the flexibility that it affords. But I think we'll come on to talk about this later, and Hannah just alluded to it before. I think it's really important in that case to look actually really at the type of experience that you are actually getting as part of your work. And I think that's going to be really, really critical as part of that. If you're getting really good experience, good solid experience, then I think SQE is a viable option. It does give more flexibility to you. I think one final point I'd just raise here as well is just to think about the funding options as well. So if you're not in the position of being sponsored by a law firm, to think very carefully about those funding options. So obviously, some government funding is available, but only for certain programs. So you've got to look very carefully at the program of learning that you're going to be doing, that will take you to where you need to be to pass SQE. Some of those programs will meet the criteria to allow you to access that funding, and some won't. So you just need to again do your research very carefully to look at those funding opportunities.
Yeah, and if it's not a master's program, I think we can say that the funding from the Student Finance England won't be there. It has to be a master's program that that wraps up the SQE or the LPC qualification within that master's that attracts that funding. But funding is available for both routes.
Yeah, could I just add one other point as well? I think it's important to have a think about the actual assessments themselves and what they cover, the sheer breadth of knowledge that is actually going to be assessed as part of SQE1. If it's been quite some time since you've done a law degree, a number of years, you've got to remember that actually the knowledge that you learnt in your law degree is going to be tested as part of the SQE. So I think that's something to bear in mind as well. If you go down the LPC route, you're not going to be tested on that knowledge again as part of those assessments, whereas with the SQE route, those assessments do test your knowledge of those foundational legal principles that you would have covered on your law degree. So if it's been quite some time ago, remember that you're going to have to bring all of that up again as well.
Absolutely. And by way of further information and further guidance to everyone, the article that Legal Chic published in association with this event, following the interview I gave to one of the members of the Legal Chic team, will go into a lot more detail as to some of these factors that might tempt you one way or the other towards the LPC or towards the SQE. So do have a look at that. And BPP do run events actually that actually grapple with this detail in much more detail, and I'll just give you a link in the chat to the events pages for those who wish to have a look at that in the future. So let's move on now to deal with the second part of the session. And I think what we'll try and do is we'll try and get, for those students whose questions haven't been answered, we will try and get those questions to you answered either directly to you or possibly publish the answers on Legal Chic's website if we can do, because I think that there are so many great questions that are coming up there. I'm now realizing that we've got a fantastic audience that have got lots of great questions and they need to be answered, and we will endeavour to answer them, maybe not all tonight, but I'm sure with the help of the panel and Liz and I, we'll get together and answer them for you over the course of the next few days. So let's go on to the second part of the question. We've started to talk about qualifying work experience already, and it was very interesting to hear from Luke a moment ago in terms of how the training contract that they currently run at Kennedy's is based on seat rotation, whereas the SQE training contract is very much I won't call it a one seat training contract, but it's a deep dive into one specialist area of law. Would that be a fair summary then, Luke?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, let's compare it, say, to TLT's model for qualifying work experience. It may be that you haven't fully designed it yet. I don't know. But so tell me, Sam, what would students have to expect? Because I hear that some firms are just literally crossing out training contract and calling it qualifying work experience training contract, and it doesn't look any different. So how are TLT looking at this issue?
So we are still keeping the 4-seat rotation process, and we are still keeping the contentious seat, which the SRA have said that you don't need to do anymore, but at TLT we are keeping that, mainly because we think that having that broad experience of 4 different areas, and especially a contentious seat, really does help when you become an NQ. They're all about complementary skills and helping you work better with your colleagues, because it is a lot about I don't know if lots of people on this event know, but we work across sectors. So lots of our teams do work for one client. So it just does help us service our clients better by having that broader knowledge of what other teams are doing. I think also in terms of if you have self-funded the SQE, then we will still want you to do the full 2 years QWE with us, because not only is it just about the 4-seat rotation, we also will be putting in like personal development workshops and other upskilling workshops throughout those 2 years that you would otherwise miss out on.
And just to follow up on one of those points you mentioned, some students will have acquired something that's capable of counting for as qualifying work experience, maybe as a paralegal, or maybe even working in a law clinic at university, or maybe staying on and working on there. Will the firm look at that and discount that from the 2 years qualifying work experience you require, or will you insist that they do the full 2-year program with TLT?
So it will work very similar to the current time to count. So it's done on a case-by-case basis and is very much done on mutual needs. So if you have that experience that you would like to take as discount from the QWE, but it also has to work for us in terms of there has to be a space and as an NQ in the firm that you want to in the team that you want to qualify in, and so it works both ways really. If it works for you and it works for us, then we will look at it. If perhaps not, and we don't think that you have the breadth of experience, such as the contentious seat that you're missing, or but also you might still want to do a seat in a team that you haven't yet done, then you'd want to do the extra 2 years as well.
Excellent, thank you. Hannah, so will your qualifying work experience look any different to a training contract at Shakespeare Martineau?
Yeah, I feel like Sam and I were on the exact same wavelength with this. I feel like we've actually made the exact same plans. It's really, really similar decisions. We've again decided to keep the 4 seats. We did toy with different seat options, but actually both for our trainees, our partners, everyone said actually it was so valuable getting that variety of experience for similar reasons. Again, contentious and non-contentious we require as well. There is that difference in experience which we think is really, really valuable in building brilliant lawyers. What we are doing some things a little bit differently. So one thing that we are doing a little bit differently as part of our training contract, we are actually extending our training contract, which I think is probably not something many law firms will be saying. And you're probably thinking, why would I want to do more time? We're extending it by 3 months. And the reason being, it's not very long, but actually we are giving all of our trainees the opportunity to do a seat in operations as well. So you would be working potentially in finance or in marketing or in one of our other operations areas, and the idea is it's really helping you to build your commercial knowledge, your commercial awareness. If you think about, particularly if you're going into areas of law where you might be working with businesses, actually understanding what's going on the other side, what your client is going through, what your client is doing on a day-to-day basis is really, really helpful. So we're building that into our training contract program, and that's one of the things that the QWE is given us the ability to do, is to kind of give more variety really to that training contract and change it up a little bit. But other than that, really, really similar. It works really, really well, and we like it as it is. It works really well. We get great lawyers at the end of it. We also, our trainees get involved in a trainee project, so our board sets projects so our trainees are working on embedding our culture in the business as one of their projects right now, so we're keeping doing that sort of stuff as well. So yeah, really similar.
Great stuff. And very briefly, do you have a view in terms of how you treat students who may have 6 months in a law clinic or pro bono work that would be capable of counting? How would you count, or would you decide and insist on that student doing a full 2-year qualifying work experience?
Yeah, exactly the same as Sam. I think it is really dependent on a case-by-case basis. It might be that we take some of that time off, but it really does depend on the individual. It depends on where that experience is, what that experience was, and whether or not there's a role available for qualification at that point as well. So, but actually, what we found is that there's a real rush to qualify right now. So before people start the training contract, there's a real rush to qualify. But actually, we found so many of our trainees actually say, do you know what, I don't want to have that time to count. Once they're in it, they're going, actually, I really want to stay as a trainee because I know I'm not going to get this experience again. So we've got, I think, of our trainee cohort this year, there's quite a few that could qualify early, and only 1 or 2 have said, I want to do it, because actually they want to have that extra seat, they want to have that extra experience. So there's so much value in getting that full time. Once you're qualified, you can't get it back. So embrace it and use it as a really good learning opportunity.
Really good point. You only get trained once, so you might as well take the opportunity whilst you've got it. So although in theory you could qualify early, you might not decide that is actually in your best interest career-wise, which makes a lot of sense from what you said. Finally, Luke, obviously we've heard about your different approach to the other guys in terms of qualifying work experience, which I think makes a lot of sense given the work streams that Kennedy's doing. What's your view of the student that comes to you with 6 months or so of qualifying work experience as a paralegal somewhere else or in a law clinic?
Yeah, so with the SQE training program, which we're offering at Kennedy's, as part of the program, the trainees on that route will be undertaking the graduate entry apprenticeship with BPP University, and we're offering a day release study model for that program. So the duration of that program is 30 months. So even those with previous work experience, because it is a set apprenticeship program they will be completing, would still need to complete the full duration of that program before they can qualify.
Okay, but I suppose for actually, let's go over to Liz now to get the window of the rest of the profession, if we could do so. Where is the rest of the profession in terms of the makeup of a new qualifying work experience training contract? Does it look like an old style training contract with, like Samantha and Hannah have said, with at least one litigation seat, or are firms starting to come up with creative new ways like Kennedy's?
Again, no surprises. Yes, there are some firms with those creative new ways, and just being able to do things a little bit different. And I think everybody's really taken the opportunity to think about what really works from the current training contracts, and take the best of what works and what fits with that firm, but also have the opportunity to change things around a little bit, as you've heard already from the panelists. I think what most firms find really does work is that opportunity to have a sort of rounded experience, an extended period of being supervised and trained and having access to all sorts of opportunities as part of that training, whether it's perhaps going on secondment or whether it's internal development, additional development opportunities that Sam was talking about before. And I think there's also something to be said as well for the sort of internal network that you gain if you have experience across different departments, perhaps across different offices. You really do benefit. Later on in your career, I think you really do benefit from having a fantastic internal network. So I think that's another advantage, one of the good things about the current system that some firms are really looking to maintain.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. This question, question number 2 of this section, is a very brief question because it only requires a brief answer. I've alluded already that the system for the LPC was quite rigid in that you would finish your law degree or your law conversion course, then you do your LPC, and then you do your 2-year training contract. There's more flexibility under the new route to do the 2 parts of the SQE assessments, either do qualifying work experience before, during, in between SQE1 and SQE2, the 2 assessments, or do it all at the end. So very briefly, what is your approach to SQE and the QWE? Is your firm doing all of the SQE exams first, or have you not made a decision yet? Where do you stand, Samantha?
So we haven't made a decision yet. I think we're weighing up all of our options in terms of is front loading the best and then 2 years QWE. We're also taking into account that the SRA have said that the SQE2 was originally meant to be at the end of QWE. So we're still considering those things. What I would really like to know is from the students, to be honest, what are your thoughts on front loading versus SQE2 at the end? Would it make you feel better knowing that you've done your QWE and got all those skills that you need for the SQE2, or would just learning it in a classroom be better? These are all the things that we're still considering at the moment. So
interesting. Yeah, interesting to know that. And just for everyone's benefit, SQE1 is quite an intense multiple choice question piece where you've got 2 papers you sit which have combined 360 multiple choice single best answer questions that you answer. Quite intense, that, on a whole range of practice and black letter law areas. And then you've got SQE2, which still brings forward a lot of the learning from SQE1, but you're tested on skills, but in the context of the black letter law and practice areas that you've been assessed on in SQE1. And in one sense, it makes sense to put I'll bring in Liz here. Sometimes it makes sense to get all the learning at the start, like we did with the LPC, so that you've got all the skills on day 1 of your training contract. But equally, what the SRA thought was, well, actually, if you do SQE2 at the end, you can pick up on all those skills you've acquired during your qualifying work experience. So where are firms looking at, from your perspective, for the majority, looking at the structure of their SQE and qualifying work experience?
Again, I mean, very much both ways. There's differing views, and it very much depends on the firms, the priorities, all number of things. I would say if you were just to look at the majority, I think the majority of firms would have a preference to sit SQE2 upfront before they start their qualifying work experience. There's a variety of reasons. Some are logistical reasons in terms of the difficulty of people sort of leaving the business for a period of time. Once they're really settled, as a trainee, and they're sort of completely into the work and involved in transactions and whatever else. It's a period of time that you have to then turn away and focus on getting ready for the assessments. So there's some sort of strong logistical reasons, planning reasons why some firms would prefer that people undertake all the exams and get them out the way before they start their qualifying work experience. But likewise, as you said, Johnny, there's also good reasons to sit those exams later on and during your qualifying work experience, because you can use some of the experience that you've already gained in the workplace and use that to help you as you approach those assessments. Again, I think also it's about looking at the program of learning as well. That is going to get you ready for SQE2, particularly if you're going to be doing SQE2 up front and you don't necessarily have the sort of the workplace on the job experience. If you don't have that, you're going to be looking at actually what program of learning can you undertake to really get you ready for those assessments. So again, no easy answers for any of these SQE questions, I'm afraid. I'd love to be able to give you a straight answer, or a yes or a no, but there is really no simple answer for any of this.
And just to clarify, the SQE2 assessments are skills-based, so they're testing skills like drafting and advocacy and case analysis. And what's happening is they're being assessed in the context of the black letter law subjects that you studied in your law degree, like equity and trusts and property or land law, company law possibly, but also in the practice areas that you're also assessed on in SQE1 as well, like business law and practice, property law and practice, dispute resolution. So it's quite extensive that you need to bring through a lot of that knowledge through to the skills assessments in SQE2. So it's helpful to have that experience in practice to sit the exams, but also it's really helpful to start in practice with all that behind you. So let's just hear from Luke and Hannah. First of all, Luke, Kennedy's, I suspect I know what the answer is going to be to this one, given I know the way you've said you've structured your training, but where does qualifying work experience come in the whole scheme of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as I said, we're offering the day release study models. So our SQE trainees will be sitting the SQE2 exam at the end of the program, and as Liz said, we feel that would be useful to use the skills that they've picked up throughout the 30-month program at Kennedy's to help them with the SQE2 assessment. And yeah, as I said earlier, we've used this model for our legal apprentices, and they have again gone through the day release study model and they're sitting their SQE1 exams, later this month in a couple of weeks. And we found it really works well for the business and works well for the apprentices. So we've decided to use that for the SQE trainees as well.
Fabulous. And Hannah, finally, what's Shakespeare Martineau's position?
Yeah, so we have two approaches actually. So the first of our SQE training contract, we decided to front load everything. Again, focus groups. We found out that actually when we asked everyone, there was 50-50. Some people saying they wanted it after, some people saying they wanted it before. So we actually made a business decision on it and said, actually, for us, it makes better sense to do it beforehand. If there's no unanimous decision, it makes better business sense for us to do it all beforehand. Also, actually, we decided that cutting someone's training contract towards the end for 3 months off so they could go and do a prep course for SQE2 and then sit their SQE2 exams, it really didn't, it was too much. It was too much of a break in their training, in their qualifying work experience, to then kind of take them out of qualifying work experience and then go back into the office. It would just be too much for us, and too much for them, we felt. So we've decided to just front load it all, and then we can focus on giving them excellent training during those 2 years. But what we haven't really touched on is, I mentioned at the beginning, we are actually offering that SQE apprenticeship. So we are actually offering the SQE graduate apprenticeship, but it will be internally. So looking at, if there is someone, if you are, let's say you're working in our, I can't think of any team right now, corporate team for argument's sake, and there is an opportunity for you to qualify in that team. You could do the SQE graduate apprenticeship. You would rotate. So again, part of our apprenticeship, we would want them to go into another area of the business for a small portion of that time, but predominantly in that seat, in that main area. But we would, you would do as an apprentice, do your SQE training throughout the duration of that period of time on your apprenticeship. So kind of two different approaches, but it's just kind of what works best for each program, we felt.
So you can see, everybody, there's different approaches by different firms, and there's no easy answer to any approach of how to implement the new regime. And I think we're all going to work out what works best for our own individual firms. I'm speaking on behalf of the firms, and obviously adjust accordingly. See how other people are doing it, see if that's more or less successful, and yeah, the profession will evolve in a way, but I don't think it'll be as homogenous as the old sort of LPC training contract regime. So the final section of the session, which we'll spend just a little bit of time on now, is talking about the choice of SQE course that students who are self-financing would have to do. Now, there's been a lot of talk, Liz, hasn't there, about non-law graduates not needing to have any sort of law foundations course or PGDL before starting the before starting the SQE. What's the source of that discussion, and is that wise in your view?
So where this comes from is that it is no longer a regulatory requirement for somebody to do a conversion course if you're a non-law graduate. The regulatory requirement is for you to pass SQE1, pass SQE2, and have your 2 years qualifying work experience. So from a regulatory perspective, there is no need, that is true. But I think it's really important to think, actually, first of all, look at the assessment. So SQE1 is an assessment of knowledge that crosses over a huge breadth of law and practice. You're still going to be assessed on all of those areas that are covered in a qualifying law degree and all of those areas that are covered in a traditional conversion course. So things like contract law, tort law, trusts, criminal law, public law, land law, those are subjects that are all taught as part of a law degree and all taught on those conversion courses. So you still have to have that knowledge in order to be able to pass the assessment. So I think that's one point, just purely looking at the assessment. And the other point, and I'm sure the panelists will come in here as well, is really thinking from a practice perspective, what depth of knowledge are law firms looking for in their future lawyers? Do you want that same depth of knowledge of contract law and tort, for example, that people have come through with in the past, having done the conversion course as a non-law graduate? And the many conversations that I've had on this point with law firms are sort of showing that actually law firms still really do value that depth of knowledge of those foundational principles of law. And so I don't think we're going to see the PGDL or the GDL conversion course disappearing for quite some time. It's needed for the assessment and needed for practice.
Well, let's take a barometer of what the profession is with the three firms represented. So, Luke, at Kennedy's, if you have a non-law undergraduate applying to you, would you require them to do the graduate conversion course, the PGDL, GDL? What's your view?
Yeah, so for those who are looking to go down the apply for our SQE training program, we do ask that they complete the GDL before starting at Kennedy's. We want our trainees to obviously have the absolute best possible chance to pass the SQE exams, and without those studying the foundational areas of law that they'll study either at a law degree or during the GDL, as Liz said, they are assessed during the SQE, so it would be really difficult. So we do ask that our SQE trainees have completed a law conversion course. Although those who are successful for the programme, we do provide reimbursement for the course.
Excellent. Hannah, what's Shakespeare Martineau to?
Yeah, we want the GDL. I think we just don't, and being honest with the SQE, it is only really just coming out now. So we don't know, we haven't seen what solicitors will look like having qualified through the SQE route yet, because we're not at that point. So we don't want to gamble with your futures, really. It's the GDL, we think, is a really, really useful tool for those who don't have a prior experience of the legal sector. So for us, yeah, we are still wanting the GDL.
And finally, Sam, I suspect I know the answer that's coming, but let us know what TLT's view is for non-law graduates.
We sponsor the PGDL, so if you haven't done any of your exams before you apply, then we will pay for you to go through that, and also the SQE training programs, and we give maintenance grants as well, so there isn't really any reason not to do it. If you have self-funded the SQE and you want to do the 2-year QWE with us, then we would potentially be open to you not having done the PGDL. If you did just do the exams, then you've already passed the SQE, but we would want to make sure that you did really know your stuff, and I think is a personal thing for you as well. Would you potentially want to be lacking in knowledge that your peers aren't? I think it's about like those career decisions that we were making earlier. Like, yes, you could do 4 different seats for QWE, but is that really the wisest choice at the time, just because you want to qualify sooner?
Yeah, I think, and the point I make in the interview I gave to Legal Chic for the article was that you've got a career that lasts for hopefully 30 plus years. For the matter of a few months extra to study an additional course that's going to make you a better lawyer, and probably give you a better chance, almost certainly, of passing the SQE. Why would you not want to do it? Yes, there's the cost element, but you've got to weigh up the cons against trying to take that shortcut, which is the concern, and the unanimous position of the firms represented here, and certainly the great majority of the firms we've been speaking to, is that there is really an expectation on you to have that learning, even though it's not a requirement for the new regime. Okay, we're ticking around to 5 o'clock now, so I just want to deal with the last question very briefly, if we could do, panel, which is question number 2 of our last section. So do you expect students to have simply passed the SQE by doing if they're self-funding a course, by doing a test preparation course that literally just prepares them for that course? Or would there be an expectation possibly for students to have acquired additional learning, possibly by doing a longer, broader course with specialist electives training, a bit like the LPC, and additional skills training? Just very briefly, if we could have a yes, no, because we're running out of time. If I could start off with Luke.
No, I mean, we wouldn't expect anything further. We'll be offering sort of further internal sort of team-specific training, internally at Kennedy. So we don't expect applicants to have that when they're applying for the roles.
Okay, thanks very much, Hannah. What's your view in terms of do you expect students to have some of this specialist knowledge like the LPC?
I think it really depends on what area you're going to be going into in law. And I think if you're applying for our SQE training contract and we're sponsoring the SQE, then we will be providing you with that specific training anyway. I think I would just suggest that anyone who's thinking, do I need to do anything specific or do I not? I would just suggest that they think about how they stand out at NQ level, because if they're thinking about qualifying themselves through the SQE, through their own QWE, we are all expecting that bottleneck that you're all facing with training contracts is just going to move up to NQ level. So you're going to be facing a bottleneck at NQ roles and how you make yourself stand out. And if you're looking to qualify into a specific area and you don't really have that specialist knowledge in it, how are you going to stand out against those who have got that specialist knowledge? So just a consideration, really, I think.
So it provides the foundation for the time you might spend during your training contract, but also makes you stand out. Oh, I see, that's a very good point. Sam, what's your view finally in terms of the additional training that students could do as part of an SQE program? If they were self-funding and applying to you, if they'd just done a pure SQE course, would you prefer them to have that extra body of learning or not?
If you have self-funded, then no, because we can't really expect people to fund more than the minimum. But we would probably put them through that anyway afterwards.
So one way or the other, some firms certainly would like students to undertake that extra learning. Liz, what's your just view looking at the rest of the profession finally before we close?
Yeah, I guess for firms that are sponsoring students through their studies, then on the whole, the preference is certainly for additional learning that goes above and beyond the SQE, that aligns itself to the type of work, the type of practices that they're going to be doing when they actually join that firm. So to the extent that firms are sponsoring their future trainees, that seems to be definitely the preference. But as all our panelists have said, that's not to discount people who are self-funding their SQE studies. There's still those opportunities to come into the firm and to have that development as part of your training when you get to the firm.
Thank you. And we have now ticked around to 5 o'clock. So thank you, panel, and thank you everybody for your fantastic questions. We will answer those questions one way or the other, either through Legal Cheat's platform, or we'll make sure we get answers to you directly. As I said, we have your details, and we will make sure we get these answers to you, because there's so many good questions here that we simply didn't have time to answer, which just proves the value in these series of SQE events. So I'd just like to thank our panelists for all being here this evening. Hannah, Luke, and Sam, and Liz, thank you so much for your contributions. It's been really enlightening, I'm sure, for many of our students. And I'd like to thank you before I now all pass over back to Legal Cheat just to close the event, if I could do. Sophie.
Fantastic. Thanks, Johnny, and thanks, speakers, for a really useful discussion about the SQE. And it's clear the students have definitely got a lot out of it with all those great questions coming in the sidebar chat. Now, before we finished off, as I mentioned earlier on, this is the first in a series of our SQE events with BPP. The next virtual event in this series with BPP is on Thursday, the 9th of December, and the theme is qualifying work experience. So everyone in the audience, that is one to pop in your diary. But we'll have further virtual events in this series in the new year, right through until the summer. Now, as I mentioned earlier on in my introduction, the video recording of today's session will be available 1 month from today in Legal Cheat's new dedicated SQE hub. And one of the Legal Cheat team is going to pop that link back in the sidebar chat. So everyone in the audience, grab that link, keep it handy, and that's where you can check back for all of your SQE content. But now all that's left to do is to say a final thank you to our speakers for joining us this afternoon. Thank you for everyone in the audience for joining us today, and have a great evening. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening.
Thank you.